There's an old Hungarian folk tale about a merchant who sold mirrors that showed not your reflection, but what others wished to see. Business was spectacular until the day he looked into his own merchandise and saw nothing. Just the empty frame, and beyond it, the wall. You know that feeling, don't you? That moment when she asks what you're thinking, and you realize you've forgotten how to think anything she hasn't already approved. Your opinions have become echoes of her preferences, your dreams edited down to fit her comfort zone. You've become so skilled at being what she needs that you've forgotten what you need. Hell, you've forgotten that you're allowed to need anything at all. Jung called it the dissolution of the self through the tyranny of the Anima projection. But Jung was being polite. What happens is far more grotesque. You become a ghost, haunting your own life, performing the role of yourself so convincingly that even you believe it's real. Picture this. A man sits at dinner, telling stories that aren't quite his, laughing at moments he's learned she finds charming, ordering wine he doesn't particularly like because she mentioned once, that men who drink red wine are sophisticated. His real preferences buried so deep they've fossilized. The waiter asks how he'd like his steak. He looks at her first, always at her first, as if his taste buds require her permission to exist. The research is damning. A 2024 study from Stockholm tracked cortisol patterns in men who consistently suppressed authentic responses in romantic relationships. After 18 months, their stress hormones resembled those of prisoners of war. But here's the truly sick part. When asked about relationship satisfaction, they rated themselves as happy, the same way a caged bird might call its cage cozy, if you asked it nicely enough. Have you noticed how your friends describe you differently now? He's changed, they say, but they can't quite put their finger on how. You haven't changed. You've been carefully edited, like a film cut for television. All the interesting parts removed, the dangerous edges sanded down, until what remains is so smooth it barely exists. There's a passage in Kierkegaard's journals where he describes watching a man at a party who kept checking his wife's face before expressing any opinion. He had learned, Kierkegaard wrote, to exist only in her reflection. When she was absent, he simply ceased. The man killed himself 3 years after she left him, not because he missed her, but because without her gaze, he couldn't locate himself. I once met a musician, brilliant guitarist, could make a Stratocaster weep, who gradually stopped playing because his girlfriend found his practice sessions emotionally distant. First, he practiced less, then only when she was out. Then he sold the guitar to buy her a necklace she'd admired. When I asked him about music years later, he looked confused, like I'd asked about someone else's life. I was never really that into it, he said, and I watched his hands unconsciously form chord shapes as he spoke. This is the black magic of modern romance, the way it convinces you that self-annihilation is love, that your disappearance is devotion. Every time you swallow your words, bite back your preferences, reshape your soul to fit her comfort, you're not building a relationship. You're conducting a séance where you're both the medium and the ghost. The truly insidious part? She doesn't even know she's doing it. Those little sighs when you mention your hobbies. The slight tension when you express an opinion she hasn't pre-approved. The way she lights up when you mirror her thoughts back to her. She's not evil. She's just been taught that love means finding someone who'll disappear beautifully into her life. And you? You've been taught that disappearing beautifully is what makes you a good man. But here's what happens in the third act of this tragedy. One day, she'll look at you with disappointment and say she doesn't know who you are anymore. That you've become boring, predictable, that the spark is gone. She'll be right, of course. How can there be a spark when you've spent years methodically extinguishing every fire in your soul that made her uncomfortable? The ancient Greeks had a word, kenosis. Self-emptying. They meant it as a spiritual practice. You've turned it into a relationship strategy, and now you're surprised when she complains that you're empty? Tell me something, and think carefully before you answer. When was the last time you disagreed with her about something that mattered? Not some performative argument about where to eat dinner. Something real. something that would require her to see you as a separate being with your own internal universe. If you can't remember, then congratulations, you've successfully murdered yourself for love. How does it feel to be your own crime scene? The more you give, the less you exist, yet the appetite only grows. In medieval France, they told stories of the Melusine, a water spirit who married a mortal man on one condition: he must never look upon her on Saturdays. For years he obeyed, until curiosity won. He peered through the keyhole and soon her lower half had become a serpent. She fled forever, but here's the part they don't tell you. He spent the rest of his life bringing offerings to the river where they'd met. Gold, jewels, his sanity, all swallowed by waters that gave nothing back. The locals said you could hear him at dawn, still apologizing to the current. Sound familiar? That gnawing certainty that if you just give a little more, try a little harder, sacrifice one more piece of yourself, she'll finally see you, finally be satisfied, finally stop looking at her phone while you're talking. But satisfaction isn't in her vocabulary, is it? There's always another test, another hoop, another way you've failed to anticipate her unspoken needs. You've become a circus animal who's learned all the tricks, but the ringmaster keeps inventing new ones. Jump higher, bend further, disappear more completely. A 2025 study from the University of Copenhagen tracked relationship dynamics in 3,000 couples. They found something horrifying. The more accommodating one partner became, the more critical the other grew. Not occasionally, consistently. As if humans are wired to despise what comes too easily, to feel contempt for what bends too readily to their will. I knew a man once, successful surgeon, hands that could repair hearts, who spent every weekend driving 4 hours to see a woman who'd text him maybe twice a week. He'd plan elaborate dates she'd cancel last minute, buy thoughtful gifts she'd forget to acknowledge. He told me, with the exhausted pride of the truly defeated, that he'd never missed a single weekend. That's love, he said. Showing up even when they don't. No, friend, that's not love. That's a man so terrified of his own emptiness that he'd rather fill it with rejection than face it alone. Schopenhauer wrote that we're like freezing porcupines. We huddle together for warmth, but our quills wound each other, so we separate, get cold, huddle again. Endless cycle. But you've pulled out your own quills, one by one, thinking that if you're defenseless enough, she'll finally embrace you. Now you're bleeding and cold, and she's complaining that you've gotten blood on her dress. Here's what they don't tell you about endless giving. It's not generous. It's grotesque. A man who'll give everything has nothing. A well that never runs dry isn't deep. It's connected to sewage. Your endless accommodation isn't love. It's a horror show where you play every part while she sits in the audience, bored, checking her watch. The Japanese have a phrase, ara mitama, the rough soul, the part of you that knows how to say no, to have edges, to take up space without apology. You've murdered your ara mitama, buried it in the backyard next to your self-respect and your poker nights. Now you wonder why she looks at you like something scraped off her shoe. You text her good morning every day at 6:47 a.m. Not because you naturally wake then, but because you've calculated it's early enough to show dedication, but not so early as to seem desperate. She responds sometimes. When she does, you pass those 2 words. Morning, babe, like sacred text. When she doesn't, you spend the day wondering what you did wrong. Was yesterday's goodnight text too needy? Should you have used a different emoji? This is what you've become. A man who conducts archaeological expeditions on emoji choices. There's a moment in every Greek tragedy where the hero realizes he's been walking toward his doom all along, that every choice he made to avoid his fate only brought it closer. You're living that moment on repeat, too blind to see that your hunger to be enough is exactly what makes you insufficient. Your desperation to be chosen is precisely what makes you unchoosable. But here's the sick joke. Even now, reading this, you're probably thinking about how to use these insights to finally win her over. How to perform enlightenment convincingly enough that she'll notice you've changed. Still feeding the hunger that feeds on feeding. Still dancing for an audience that left the theater years ago. You want to know the most pathetic part? Tomorrow morning at 6:47 a.m., you'll still send that text. Your thumb will hover over the send button for just a moment, a fleeting second where your aramitama tries to claw its way back to life. But you'll send it anyway, because the hunger is all you have left, and starving feels too much like dying. When did you become so afraid of your own appetite that you decided to feast on crumbs? When did you convince yourself that love means being grateful for whatever falls from her table? And here's the real question, the one that should keep you awake at night. If she finally gave you everything you think you want, her attention, her approval, her desire, would you even know what to do with it? Or have you been a beggar so long you've forgotten how to eat? Every man she's loved before still haunts your bed. There's a monastery in Tibet where monks meditate in a room full of human skulls. Each skull, they say, was once convinced it was special. Each one believed its thoughts mattered more than the others. Now they grin the same calcium grin, indistinguishable in their finality. This is what it feels like to love a woman who's loved before. You're just the newest skull in her collection, pretending your smile is different. She tells you about him sometimes. Usually after wine, when her guard drops and her voice takes on that distant quality, like she's reading from a book written in another lifetime. He used to. She'll start, and you'll feel your spine turn to ice. He used to make her laugh. He used to cook that dish perfectly. He used to fuck her in ways that made her forget her own name. And you? You're trying to make her remember why she chose you, but you're competing with a ghost who gets more perfect every year he's gone. The Portuguese have a word, saudade, for the presence of absence, the weight of what's missing. Your entire relationship is built on saudade. Not for someone dead, but for every version of her that loved someone else. The her that was 22 and believed in forever. The her that was 28 and had her heart shattered so beautifully she still writes poetry about it. The her that was 31 and just having fun with that guitarist who never texted back, but Lord, could he make her feel alive? You're not just competing with these men. You're competing with who she was when she loved them, younger, less guarded, more willing to dive headfirst into the beautiful catastrophe of romance. Now she loves you with one foot out the door, with terms and conditions, with the exhausted caution of someone who's already seen how this movie ends. A 2024 study from the Berlin Institute of Psychological Research found that people unconsciously compare new partners to an idealized composite of all previous lovers. Not the real men, the remembered ones, the edited versions, the highlight reels. You're not competing with Dave who forgot her birthday. You're competing with Dave who made her feel alive that one summer in Barcelona. How do you win against a memory that improves with age like wine she'll never finish drinking? Nietzsche wrote about eternal recurrence, the idea that we're doomed to repeat every moment infinitely. But he was wrong. It's worse. We're doomed to repeat every moment while knowing it's a repetition. She kisses you and tastes other mouths. You hold her and feel other hands that held her first, better, different. Every "I love you" comes with an asterisk. Results may vary from previous experiences. I once watched a man go through his girlfriend's old photos, trying to understand who she'd been before him. 3 hours in, he looked like he'd aged a decade. She looked happier, he said, staring at a picture of her with her ex at some beach. And the terrible thing? He was right. She did look happier. Not because that man was better, but because that woman still believed happiness was possible without disclaimers. You know what's truly grotesque? The way you've started to imitate them. You overheard her mention her ex liked craft beer, and suddenly you're a connoisseur. She let slip that her first love played guitar, and now you're watching YouTube tutorials at 2 a.m., your fingers bleeding on strings that will never sound like his. You're not becoming yourself. You're becoming a tribute band to every man who's disappointed her. Here's what guts me. The way she sometimes looks through you. Not at you. Through. Like she's trying to see someone else in your outline. In those moments, you realize you're not a person to her, you're a palimpsest. A manuscript where the original writing has been scraped off and written over, but the old words still bleed through. You're making love to her, and she's closing her eyes to see clearer. But the real horror. Sometimes late at night you catch yourself wondering about your exes too, comparing her to that girl who laughed at all your jokes, or the one who never made you feel like you were auditioning for a role you'd already lost. And in that moment, you realize you're both just skulls in each other's monastery, grinning at nothing, pretending this time is different. The Buddhists say attachment is suffering. They're wrong. Attachment to someone who's still attached to ghosts? That's not suffering. That's performance art, where everyone's reading from different scripts in different languages, about different plays, and wondering why the reviews are terrible. She'll tell you she's over him, all of them, that the past is the past. And maybe she even believes it. But notice how she still sleeps on the left side of the bed because he preferred the right. Notice how she won't watch certain movies, visit certain restaurants, listen to certain songs. The past isn't past. It's the invisible choreographer of your present, and you're dancing to music only she can hear. So here's my question for you, skull in waiting. How does it feel to be haunted by men you've never met? To lose a competition you entered too late? To love someone who's already used up all her first times, her butterflies, her belief that love conquers all? And more importantly, why are you so desperate to be the last man standing in a graveyard where everyone eventually lies down? In the space between words, you finally hear yourself. Last winter, I met a man who'd been living alone in the mountains for 3 years. Not some enlightened hermit, just a regular guy who'd gotten tired of explaining himself. "You know what I discovered," he said, pouring tea with hands that had forgotten how to hurry. "Silence doesn't judge. It doesn't need you to be anything. It just lets you be. There's a German word, verschlimmbessern, to make something worse by trying to improve it. That's what you've done with solitude. Turned it into failure. Made it mean you're unlovable, unwanted, defective. But what if silence is not your punishment, but your pardon? What if alone is not where you're sent when you fail, but where you go to finally succeed at being yourself? Consider this. Every moment you've spent performing yourself for others, smiling when you wanted to scream, agreeing when you wanted to argue, staying when you wanted to leave, you were accumulating a debt, not to them, to yourself. And solitude? That's where you pay it back, with interest. A 2025 study from the Institute of Human Consciousness in Zurich found something remarkable. Men who spent extended periods in voluntary solitude showed increased activity in brain regions associated with authentic self-expression. Not loneliness, not depression, actual neural rewiring that made them more themselves. As if being alone teaches your brain to stop translating and start speaking its native language. Kierkegaard knew this. "The most painful state of being," he wrote, "is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have." But here's what Soren missed. The future you'll never have might be the prison you'll never enter. Every relationship you don't pursue is a performance you don't have to give. Every woman who doesn't text back is a mirror. You don't have to distort yourself to please. I think about the Japanese concept of me, negative space. In art, it's not emptiness, it's potential. The pause between notes that makes music possible. The white canvas that gives meaning to the brushstroke. Your solitude isn't empty space, it's ma. It's where you stop being an echo and start being a voice. You fear the quiet because you've been taught that male value is measured in female attention, that a man alone is a man failing. But what if the opposite is true? What if every moment you spend chasing validation is a moment you're not becoming valid? What if the real tragedy isn't that you're alone, but that you're so terrified of aloneness you'll pay any price to avoid it, including yourself? There's an old Sufi story about a man who spent years seeking God in temples, in crowds, in the eyes of others. Finally, exhausted, he gave up and went home. Sitting in his empty room, he heard a voice. "I've been waiting here the whole time." That voice, It wasn't God, it was himself. The self he'd been too busy to meet. But here's where it gets interesting, where solitude becomes not just medicine, but magic. When you stop needing someone to complete you, you become complete. Not in some new age self-help way, in a real, visceral, terrifying way. You start making choices because you want to, not because you need to. You develop tastes that no one influenced, opinions no one shaped, dreams no one edited. Remember that musician I mentioned, the one who sold his guitar? I ran into him last year, playing at a dive bar at 2 a.m. for an audience of 6 drunks and a bartender. He looked alive. Turns out, 3 years after she left, he'd bought another guitar, started playing in his apartment until neighbors complained, then in parks, then wherever would have him. "I'm not good anymore," he said between sets, "but I'm mine." The ancient Greeks had 2 words for time: chronos, clock time, and kairos, the right time, soul time. All your relationships? You've been living in chronos, scheduling yourself, performing yourself, racing against some imaginary deadline where you need to be chosen before you expire. But solitude? That's where kairos lives, where an hour can feel like a minute or a year, depending on what your soul needs it to be. And yes, I see you flinching, because you've been programmed to see this as cope, as what losers tell themselves when they can't get laid. But notice who programmed you to think that way. Notice who benefits from your desperation. Notice how much money is made, how much power is maintained by keeping you terrified of your own company. Want to know the most radical thing you can do in a world that profits from your incompleteness? Be complete. Want to know the most rebellious act in a culture that needs you needy? Need nothing. Not in a bitter way, not in a "I'll show them" way, but in the quiet, revolutionary way of a man who's discovered he's already whole. So here's my challenge, and it's going to sound insane because it is. Spend 1 full day without checking if anyone messaged you, without wondering what she's doing, without performing for an audience that exists mostly in your head. Just you and the silence that's been trying to tell you something your whole life. Listen to what it says. You might discover that the voice you've been drowning out with all that noise, it's been trying to tell you something beautiful. You're already enough. You've always been enough. You just needed the quiet to hear it. When you stop bleeding for approval, you start living for truth. There's a species of pine that only releases its seeds after a forest fire. The cones stay locked for decades, waiting, not for rain or perfect conditions, for catastrophe, for everything around them to burn. Only in that destruction do they finally open, finally grow. You've been through the fire, haven't you? The one where everything you thought you were got, reduced to ash. Good. Now we can talk about what grows after. Here's what nobody tells you about reaching the other side of desperation. Love looks different here. Not like the movies, not like the songs. It looks like a Tuesday afternoon where you realize you haven't checked your phone in 3 hours. It looks like saying no without explaining why. It looks like the terrifying intimacy of being seen without your performance makeup on. A monk in Thailand once told me, "The cup that's already broken is the most beautiful." And when you accept it's already shattered, you stop gripping so tight. You stop being careful. You use it fully, freely, without fear. That's you now, already broken, already failed, already rejected by the version of love you thought would save you. And in that brokenness, freedom. The research backs this up. A longitudinal study from McGill University tracked men who'd experienced what they termed romantic ego death, that moment where you stop believing love will complete you. 5 years later, 73% reported higher life satisfaction than their constantly seeking counterparts. Not because they found someone, because they found themselves in the rubble of who they thought they had to be. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. And if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." But Arthur was only half right. It's not about loving solitude. It's about loving what solitude reveals. That you're not a half waiting for another half. You're a whole who spent years cutting himself in pieces, hoping someone would want the fragments. I think about this bartender I knew in Prague. Mid-50s, weathered face, hands that had poured 10,000 drinks for 10,000 people trying to forget. Women half his age would flirt with him mercilessly. He'd smile, pour their drinks, send them on their way. "Don't you get lonely?" I asked one slow night. He laughed, not bitter, but rich like aged whiskey. Loneliness is when you're with someone and still feel empty. Solitude is when you're alone and feel full. I'm not lonely, friend. I'm just not for sale anymore. That's the secret revolution happening in male hearts around the world. Not the angry kind where you blame women or retreat into bitterness. The quiet kind where you simply stop auditioning, stop competing. Stop believing that your worth is measured in how much someone wants you. Start knowing it's measured in how much you want yourself. And here's where it gets beautiful. And I mean beautiful in the way a scar is beautiful, the way winter is beautiful, the way truth is beautiful, especially when it hurts. When you stop needing love, it sometimes finds you. Not always, not definitely, but sometimes. And when it does, it's different. It's not the desperate clutching of two people trying to complete each other. It's two complete people choosing to complicate their lives with connection. It's saying, "I don't need you," and meaning it, then following with, "But I want you here," and meaning that too. It's love with exit doors that nobody uses because nobody's trapped. It's the difference between a prisoner and a guest. Both might stay in the same room, but one has a choice. There's a Japanese ceramic art called kintsugi. They repair broken pottery with gold, making the repaired piece more beautiful than the original. That's what happens after your romantic ego dies. You don't hide the cracks, you gild them. You don't pretend you were never broken. You make art from the breaking. But let me be brutally clear about something. This isn't about becoming some stoic robot who doesn't feel. It's about feeling everything. The loneliness, the desire, the hope, the fear, and choosing yourself anyway. It's about 3 a.m. when everyone's coupled up and you're walking home alone, and instead of feeling like failure, it feels like freedom. It's about deleting dating apps, not because you're bitter, but because you're busy becoming someone worth dating. The Taoists have this concept, wu-wei, action through non-action. Stop pushing the river, and it carries you. Stop chasing love, and sometimes it walks up and sits down next to you. Not because you played the game right, but because you stopped playing the game at all. And maybe it doesn't. Maybe you spend the rest of your days in your own company, learning your own rhythms, laughing at your own jokes, being your own witness. Is that really so terrible? Is that really worse than spending those same days shape-shifting for someone who'll never see you anyway? Here's my final dare for you. Look in the mirror tonight. Not to check if you're attractive enough, not to practice your smile, just to meet the eyes of the only person who's guaranteed to be with you until the very end. Can you love what you see? Not in a narcissistic way, in the way you'd love a good friend who's been through hell and came out different but intact. Can you say to that reflection, "You're enough"? Even if nobody else ever sees it, you're already enough. Because when you can, when you really can, everything changes. Not outside, inside. And inside is the only place that ever really mattered anyway.